So you're driving down the street and that thing happens to you that nobody wants to happen to them. You look up in your rearview mirror and you see the blue lights and the red lights and the police car coming up behind you. And everybody universally has the same kind of reaction. There's a tension, it runs through your mind, what did I do? You know, and then you immediately begin, as you find a way to pull over, to think about how you're going to talk your way out of whatever it is that officer's going to stop you for and think what you did. That's universal. What's not universal is if you happen to be a person of color, if you happen to be driving while black or driving while brown, if you're African American or Hispanic, the experience is different than if you're white. In this country generally, communities of color understand this. The people who don't understand it are white, and that's a reality. And so here's what happens: is if you're a person of color and this happens, all the things that kick in that are wrong and challenging to you as a person of color, and the relationship of minority communities to the police all kick in. And the younger you are, the more difficult it becomes. In this country, at this point, there are serious issues with racially biased policing. Now, we're not standing here saying that all police officers are racist. There's over 900,000 men and women in local policing in this country. A little over 14,000 municipal police departments, 3,000 sheriff's departments. The good news is they get it right almost all the time. They do all the things that they're supposed to do, and they do it correctly. The bad news is many times there are those that don't get it right, and sometimes its entire communities are affected. For example, I mean, we dealt with Ferguson. Ferguson, Missouri was not an anomaly in terms of it's a one-time deal. The sense of it is there are communities in those 14,000 plus municipalities that was a reality that the people of color in those other communities feel every day. So the question is, how does a community begin to deal with this? You know, policing in this country is dedicated to the idea of protecting everybody's human rights, their civil rights, and their dignity. Now, understanding that to do this and to do the job that they're sworn to do, which is serve and protect, and justice for all. Those are the nice things that go on badges. My badges all my life have said those sentiments. It's not enough to write it on a badge and put it in a mission statement. It has to be lived every day by the men and women delivering the service. So dealing with that sense of who we are as police officers, who we are as community, and the complexities in terms of policing across racial and ethnic lines is the challenge now, and has been for decades the challenge for American policing. Now, there are ways to do this correctly. Clearly there are, because we see it demonstrated. In one of the philosophical constructs over the last 35 years has been community policing. Community policing is redefining the police service back to its core, of uniformed police officers delivering a service at the neighborhood level, uniformed police officers understanding and knowing who it is that they're serving, and having an engagement, a relationship with the people in their communities that they're working with, on the beats that they're working in, being engaged with them, working with them on problem solving, and doing the kind of organizational transformation inside the police agency that supports all of that. For example, over the last many decades, police departments have become better educated. The officers are certainly much more educated today than they were when I started, 45 years ago. But education wasn't the only thing that needed to happen. As we became educated and we became more professional in terms of the delivery. We also tended to become more militaristic, more reactive instead of engaged in problem solving, and it began to change, particularly among all communities, but particularly affected were minority communities in that change. And so the community policing brings us back to the core and says, let's stop over-specializing. You know, when the majority of police officers in any police department are in plain clothes and specialty units, they're not out there delivering the daily service that needs to happen. Detectives and SWAT teams and specialty teams, all those things are necessary, but they have one basic mission. That's to support the uniformed beat officer working in the neighborhoods that they're out to protect. When you do that, you're actually redesigning a police department, you're transforming the department and training the men and women up to this engagement. It is not the community's response to police better, it is the police response to police better, and it is the community's responsibility to, when they do that, to engage at that level and build something that has to be there for policing in a democracy to succeed. That is to build trust. And every time when you watch the news, every time when you see that light come up in your rear car window, in your mirror, there is that element of trust. How do I trust that what's about to happen is going to be fair to me and that the officer is going to carry out his or her duties correctly? When I call for help at the house, when I call for assistance at my business, I have to have the trust that I'm going to get an equitable, a quality service from the officers. The men and women policing that I've been working with and part of all my life believe that that's what they want to do. And they have to work at it every day to make that a value in the service that they're delivering. So when it comes back to these core issues, you know, the police and the relationship with the community cannot fix all the racial divides that communities deal with, but they are an essential part of making that divide less painful around the work that they have to do. And when they're working at that, when they're fully engaged with their communities, that will happen. So when you see, as you just saw in the little clip, you know, when you see that sense of questioning, why was I stopped? You know, nagging idea that I was stopped because of the color of my skin, because I'm African American or I look Hispanic. Why did that happen to me? And how do I respond? One of the tragedies in racially biased policing when it happens is particularly for young people. You know, the fear instilled at a very young age is a lifelong mark on the person that becomes fearful of the police that are there and will tell you every day they're sworn to protect you, they're sworn to serve, and sometimes the police just sometimes do not get this. For example, you know, we've been through, and I've been through a lot of focus groups and workshops and community policing problem-solving sessions with police and community. And some of the language police officers, when they get in the room, and police leadership, including police chiefs sometimes, will talk about the minority community's perception of racially biased policing. And when they say it that way, and you look at the men and women who are in the room, they look back and they say, what perception? This is a reality. There's no perception here. This really happens to us on a regular basis. And it's up to you guys to first recognize that there's a problem in terms of this basic sense that this is not about miscommunication. This is about a policing practice. Police use pretext stops as an enforcement tool, and the data proves over and over again that those pretext stops, that means stopping people for very minor traffic offenses or for minor public offenses and engaging them to find out what they're doing or who they are overwhelmingly is used against at a higher rate against minority communities, and particularly young minorities in those communities. And the outcome is different. When you look at those stops, whereas you may get stopped for an illegal left turn and may get a warning. If you're a young Latino or a young black man, you're more than likely to get a ticket and sometimes get arrested. You're more than likely to be asked if we can search your car. We're more than likely to be detained for quite a bit of time on the side of the road while this conversation takes place. That's not a typical conversation in other parts of the community that they are in minority communities. That is the core of the problem. Now, the police talk a great deal about how sometimes it's necessary to police with that style, particularly in neighborhoods that they call troubled neighborhoods or war zones, a term. The neighborhood I happen to live in is described, and I've lived in the same neighborhood for 45 years, sometimes as a war zone or a combat zone. That's ridiculous. I've been in war zones and combat zones. Our communities are not war zones and combat zones. Our communities are neighborhoods that some have more problems than others, and they need an engaged government and engaged police to do problem solving in a meaningful way in order to make them less engaged. But if you brand some place as a war zone, then the object is to take military action in that war zone instead of police action in the way we've been describing it. The police action has to be back to that core sense of mission of protecting everybody's civil rights and their human rights, and above all, their dignity as one deals with the police that are out there to serve and to protect. Thank you.